philosophy is action. Then Arvind got the email from Akash.
Akash had a proposal to stop COVID-19. I forwarded it to the team. Text from my sister, who is an eye surgeon at a major hospital in New York. Sad case today. A 17-year-old with a bad injury from yard work. Full corneal laceration, traumatic cataract and retinal detachment. His father was so devastated. When we were talking, he collapsed and hugged me out of sorrow. Now I feel like I'm covered in corona.
Akash wrote that he had 735 kilograms of niclosamide on its way to the U.S. They were going to use it for a clinical trial as a form of birth control, as a spermicide, but they wanted to try it for COVID-19. They were in contact with the FDA. Niclosamide was invented by Bayer in the 1950s and was mostly used in the developing world to treat tapeworm. It had been pulled off the U.S. market in 1996, but it was still made elsewhere. The argument was that niclosamide might work because, even though it had never been used to treat SARS or MERS during an outbreak, long after the fact, it was shown that niclosamide could stop those viruses from replicating inside us. The COVID-19 virus had the same 11 proteins as SARS and MERS, the same arsenal of weapons. Normally, VCs take weeks or months to study a deal. This took us about an hour to say yes, which was the length of our first phone call. It was a blind bet with no evidence, only theory. Usually those bets bust. We would have been fine with that.
We were worried about Craig. He'd been coming by the lab to borrow our RT-PCR for weeks. He was so frustrated by the lack of testing that he invented an alternative to the CDC's protocol. He took 4 steps and simplified it into 1 step. He and Gabe were out on the street testing random people, including the homeless. Then Craig got some positive samples from UCSF and was able to confirm his test worked. He had a lab space arranged. He could start testing in 3 days, but he needed money to buy a real-time ABI 7500 DX PCR to handle the volume. When we tried to wire him $250,000, he realized he hadn't even set up a bank account yet.
Sleep was important. Sleep as much as possible. Roll out of bed, Zoom calls for 14 hours. Days became a photocopy of the day before. Without the texture of moving around the city or bouncing around IndieBio, I became forgetful. My memories were unmoored from geography, synthetic, like boring dreams I couldn't wake from. Arvind wrote a letter to all our alumni.
Nobody knows how long this will last. Nobody knows how this will end. I do know this. Nothing is ever as good as it looks or as bad as it feels. We will be fine. We may even be better from it. But first, we must survive it. You are all IndieBio companies, which means you are already survivors, born and bred in the basement on Jesse Street in the Tenderloin. Walking into the office meant stepping over the hardships of life just to face it again in the lab. But this shock is different. COVID-19 will test us all.
At least a dozen of our alumni were running into the fire. In Korea, their zoonotic virus lab tried 3,000 existing drugs in a high-throughput screen using kidney cells infected with the virus. They found 24 that worked well, and niclosamide was one of the 2 that stood out above the rest. We called the Gates Foundation to get it on their radar. Around the same time, Akash got great results back on niclosamide from the Galveston National Lab, a biosafety level 4 containment facility that worked with live virus. 3 medical centers had agreed to start a trial.
Text from my sister in New York. I have an emergency transplant to do. She will lose her eye by tomorrow. Patient should be tested for COVID but hasn't. The virus can become airborne during intubation and infect the whole operating room for hours. They don't have a mask for me. I sent an N95 mask to her by FedEx. It arrived 3 hours late. We had just opened IndieBio New York. Our team there never even had a chance to visit the lab before being sent home. But they were working with the state.